Good morning, everyone. Is that working? I think that's working. Welcome to this meeting of the County Council's Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures or use social media during the meeting. Could I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate while the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There is no fire alarm test for today, so if the alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and we will leave by the side doors to use the fire escape next to the kitchen and make our way to the assembly point in the car park. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Tamar.
Apologies received from Councillor Ross Martin.
Thank you. And Chris is here, and I think Mark is going to be slightly late, is that right? But we'll look forward to seeing him. Thank you. The second, would anybody like to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? I see no indications. Oh, actually, one more thing. Alex Beckett, apologies for being late, but he will be here shortly. If anybody needs to disclose an interest at any point during the meeting, just raise your hand. We can take those at any point. Item 2 is the minutes of this meeting and of the special meeting of the committee held on the 29th of January. Are we happy to agree those as a correct record? I see no indications, and therefore I will assume that the committee is happy to agree those as a correct record, and I will sign them shortly. There is also an updated action log included with the published papers. Most of the actions are complete with 4 ongoing. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. It's concerning item 40 on the action log to do with the Council's website search facility, and particularly in relation to freedom of information request answers. And I don't fully understand the answer which has been given in item 40. I note that it is noted that it's good practice to publish freedom of information responses, but I'm not quite sure I understand what the broader picture is mentioned in that answer. It says there's work being done to reintroduce a disclosure log. I don't fully understand what that means. Does it mean that we have work which is being done which will allow freedom of information responses to be viewed, or does that mean something different, please?
I think the Chief Executive is going to answer that for you.
Actually, Chair, I was checking with the Assistant Chief Executive or the Monitoring Officer if she's online, given that they both jointly own the action, to see if one of them would choose to respond to Councillor Bowden.
We'll give them a minute, and if they don't respond quickly, we'll get you a written answer, which they seem not to. Okay, we'll get you a written answer, which may or may not arrive before the end of the meeting, but I hope it will. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question, which I think is very reasonable. The next item on the agenda is petitions and public questions. We have received no petitions or public questions, so we will move to item 4 on the agenda, which is the Integrated Finance and Monitoring Report, which is introduced by Tom Kelly. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. In this report, we are reporting an improvement in our general fund revenue forecast. At the end of January, we were forecasting a £3.1 million or 1% overspend in the revenue budget, alongside a £37 million overspend in the ring-fenced high needs block. This improvement in our revenue forecast follows concerted efforts across the Council to respond to the financial pressures we face. These steps have included additional scrutiny pre-procurement, so commencing and checking specifications and savings opportunities, transactional level challenge in individual directorates and from the corporate centre, review of our purchasing approvals thresholds involving more senior officers applying scrutiny at lower levels of expenditure, enhanced controls and scrutiny to our workforce decisions, so consistent and prioritised recruitment decisions, Supply chain management, working with suppliers to hold pricing where we can, and then application of available grant funding to our spending pressures and priorities as well. In combination, this focus of financial management across the organisation is leading to progress we're reporting today. We remain £3 million in excess of the budget voted by members at the start of the year, but if we can achieve an outturn closer to the balance, this aids our financial resilience and sustainability to respond to the ongoing financial challenges and pressures that we face going into future years. There are 5 recommendations to the committee in the report today. A and B are about grant funding, and A and C enable deployment of funds to our spending plans. So together they bring forward the local delivery of the National Best Start in Life programme, further support our holiday voucher scheme, and enable our, for the first time, the Connect to Work programme, a new grant funding stream for the County Council. Recommendations D and E relate to our debt recovery and debt management individual cases, and there are further information about those in the confidential appendix. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to say how delighted I am that we are doing the Connect to Work programme. I think that's really exciting news for the council. Any questions or any questions to start with from members for Tom? Wow, no questions. Okay, any debate on this item? Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly not a debate item from me, because that's a prerogative for elected members, quite rightly. I just wanted to make a comment, if I may, Chair, and whilst the report sets out that the authority is currently forecasting a year-end overspend against the revenue budget, I think members of this committee will recognise just how significant the pressures were at the earlier points in the financial year, particularly during 2025. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to recognise the significant improvements in financial control and grip that's been applied across the authority, both by executive directors and their teams, but particularly by the finance and procurement teams supported by other parts of the corporate centre, including HR. So I just thought it was important to draw out the fact that whilst the position presented still represents a slight overspend forecast compared to where the authority thought it would be probably in the summer of last year, that represents a substantial improvement, and that has not been without pressure or pain in different parts of the organisation, but nonetheless represents a significant turnaround. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank the officers concerned for delivering upon that. I hasten to add, for the benefit of members, that that work has not stopped and continues right up to the 31st of March, and many of those additional control measures that we've applied during the course of this year will continue unabated from the start of the new financial year to ensure we maintain financial sustainability. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think those are really important points. And I think I was wondering whether the committee would be happy for this committee to send something to some of the managers who've been involved in the really difficult work of trying to get those budgets under control, to thank them for the complex and challenging efforts that they have made. I think it's important for them to appreciate that we appreciate how tough that has been. So if the committee are content for me as chair of this committee to draft that letter on your behalf, I think it would be appropriate to thank our officers for the work that they did. I think in particular during the autumn, in trying to bring those budget overspends under control. If anybody objects to my doing that, say now, and if not, I will write on your behalf. I don't see any objections. Thank you. I am also, given that no one else is going to raise it, going to say a little bit more about the Connect to Work grant funding, which is also part of this. This is something that I know perhaps more about than most members of this committee, because it is funding that has come through the combined authority from government. There was a bidding process to receive that funding. And I am really pleased that the County Council was successful in that process. And I think it's a real vote of confidence in our skills team that that is coming through the County Council. And it will also enable a really good degree of join up between that funding and the work that is already being done by our skills team. So it's exciting that we have that funding coming through. Ros.
Can I just ask about Connect to Work? So it is connecting people to work, but not as in it's not getting them to work, which is another connection, another massive issue in our county, but it is about a different. So it's one type of connection, but not the other. And is there anything in place to support the other, which can be the biggest challenge, bigger challenge?
So I completely understand what you're trying to say there, in that this is work that's being done by coaches and people who will help. So no, it is not transport connection, I think, is what I'm trying to say. This is tutoring and supporting people to be in a position to be able to apply for jobs. There was quite a bit of discussion at the Skills Committee on Monday about the fact that one of the things that prevents people from accessing work is transport, and that this funding mostly is not dealing with the transport. And I think it will mostly not deal with transport, but it is something that the Skills Committee and the Combined Authority are mindful is a key part of enabling people to access work. But this is not mostly that funding for that, sadly. Any more comments or questions? Alison.
Thank you. Really just following on from that, obviously there's an awful lot of work going on to try and help people who are struggling one way or another, help with our younger people, getting them into places. And the amount of work that's actually going on from the team is actually really quite incredible, and some really, really good results coming out of that. So I just really wanted to say thank you to them for all of that. Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. May I ask a question on on Annex B, please? And I'm sorry to have to ask this question, but and it may end up proving to be a stupid question, but if you don't ask stupid questions, then you remain stupid. So I wonder if an explanation can be given to me on the first page of numbers on this report, paragraph 1.1.1, Finance and Resources, the Revenue Executive Summary. If I can give maybe Michael time to get to that, maybe Tom can answer. I don't understand, and I'm afraid this is going to have to be spelled out to me in simple terms. I don't understand how the first row of numbers actually works. That is, for the service area for the Executive Director of Finance and Resources. I see that the gross budget was 345,000. I see that the actual to date 204,000. I see a forecast outturn variance of minus 351,000, which I don't fully understand and may need a bit of explanation. And I certainly don't understand the forecast outturn variance of minus 72.8%, since I don't see what that is minus 72.8% of. I wonder if an explanation can be given in simple terms for me to explain where I've gone wrong in understanding these numbers.
I certainly can't answer that. Michael or Tom.
So I think that you may have spotted an error with the percentage there, because it doesn't look natural. Although when I have looked into these queries before, there is sometimes an arithmetical route to get to the answer. So we will look at that, Councillor Bowden, and come back to you. I think probably the remarkable thing here, though, is that we are forecasting some underspends against a very small budget. So there is this is the kind of core headquarters budget for the directorate, and there will be underspends in that line, which we can report on further. That is likely to include the directorate-wide vacancy savings. So we will be collecting the vacancy savings across customer and digital services, finance, procurement, and property, and grouping those together as part of that additional scrutiny and challenge on workforce decisions into that headline cost centre. But quite how that then gets to 72%, I will need to confer with my colleagues and come back to you on whether that's correct or not.
the important, more important than the percentage, which is almost cosmetic, are the numbers correct? And that is my reading of this, and maybe for the reasons that Tom has just explained, Lucy, is that we've got a gross budget for this particular service area of 345,000, and our expected outturn is minus 6,000. Have I understood that part correctly?
So we're actually expecting a underspend of 350,000 in this area.
Sorry, I'm not talking about an underspend. I'm talking about the actual spend. We've got a gross budget of 345,000. If there's an outturn variance of minus 351,000, then we're anticipating that we will have a net negative spend on this service area of minus 6,000. Have I understood that correctly?
No, so sorry. So the net negative spend will be 351,000.
Yeah, Chair, seeing as it's my budget. The position at the moment is that a number of the savings that were held were cross-cutting across the area, including vacancy savings. They've not been counted at the present moment within the actuals, which is why you've got, so the actuals basically includes my area, but you'll see therefore it hugely changes to the forecast outturn. We've not applied those in effect to the actuals yet, but can forecast them because we are aware that the customer and digital line, which is the following line, we have sought mitigating savings against those, largely from third-party contracts. So we have overachieved on the customer and digital services. The corporate savings line that was held within my executive director budget was in relation to customer services savings, 330,000, and that actually is due and is on target. We just haven't allocated those back out to the customer and services budget line, so they're showing still on my line, but the actual expenditure, as it were, is on customer and digital.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you very much indeed. And I do understand how these anomalies can be created. And I'm not saying it's wrong at all, but I do understand how they can be created. But I still don't understand the answer that Tom gave, that because my reading of this is if we had a gross budget of 345,000 and we have a forecast outturn variance of minus 351,000, that's a variance to the budget. It's not a variance to zero. So I'm assuming that I can't see why it is not the case that we are working on an outturn at the moment, an estimated outturn of minus 6,000, not of minus 351,000. That figure under forecast outturn variance is not the figure of the outturn, it's the figure of the outturn variance. So surely we are saying in here, if I understand these numbers correctly, that we are anticipating at the moment that the forecast outturn is minus 6,000.
Yes, sorry, Councillor Bowden, that is correct. So my previous answer was not correct. You've interpreted it correctly. It's a minus 6,000 forecast there once you take that position.
That's very much appreciated, Lucy. Now I understand what I do understand, which is good. What I don't yet understand is how to create minus 72.8% out of that. And I'll be very grateful for a written answer to explain that.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you to Tom and Michael for your explanations of those figures. I don't see any other hands, and I think the key point on this paper is for, I think there are a couple of key points. The first, there are some good grant things that are happening there, which is fantastic. It's also extremely good news that the overall overspend has come down as much as it has, and we are extremely grateful to the very large number of people across the county who have worked very hard to get that overspend down as much as it has come down, which I know hasn't been easy. So we will write to thank people for that and express our appreciation. And it does mean that as we go into the coming year, we are able to be, I hope, a little more confident that our budget will be manageable for the coming year, which is also very important. So thank you very much to Tom and Michael and the whole finance team for that. I'm just checking whether I think we just note that report. Oh, no, we need to approve the recommendations. I haven't heard anybody speak against any of the recommendations, so I'm going to assume that we can take them as a block. All those in favour, well, do you need a proposer and seconder, Tamar? I'm happy to propose.
I'm going to ask.
Oh, Ricky.
I'd like to ask them to be taken separately, if possible.
Okay, that's fine. We can take them separately. Can I just take a proposer and seconder first? So I'm happy to propose them from the chair. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Edna. All those in favour of recommendation A, if you could indicate, please. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. All those in favour of recommendation B. Thank you. I think that's unanimous. All those in favour of recommendation C, if you could indicate, please. Lisa's got her hand up. Sorry. And any against recommendation C and abstentions? So that was 10 in favour and 2 abstentions. Thank you. All those in favour of recommendation D? I think that's unanimous. And all those in favour of recommendation E? Also unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you to the finance team again. We'll move on to item 5, which is the Economic Strategy and Action Plan, which is Ethna George. Thank you. Welcome, Ethna, and also welcome Emma, who is also coming to support Ethna with this.
Good morning. I'm here to present the latest version of the Economic Strategy and Action Plan with a view to asking committee to consider approval of these today. This builds on the draft versions of these that I presented at committee on the 11th of December last year. I will firstly just take this opportunity to remind you of the reason this proposed new area of work has come forward and is being considered today. As a large local authority, we undertake a wide range of functions that impact the local economy. How we discharge those functions can help to support a more inclusive and sustainable local economy, or not, leading to missed opportunities. The proposals before you have been developed with input from across the council to help identify where we are missing those strategic opportunities and where we have scope within our current or anticipated future activities to improve our impact. There is also very strong evidence from the 2025 Quality of Life Survey conducted amongst Cambridgeshire residents that the local economy continues to be one of their greatest concerns. 87% expressed concern about the cost of living crisis, with over half of respondents reporting having to take action on this in the last year. 62% reported being concerned about jobs and investment. Many look to the council for support with these challenges. This underlines that this is an issue that residents want to see the council take action on to improve their circumstances, and the need to identify new ways to deliver this in addition to existing activities and funded work streams. Since coming into committee previously, we have undertaken a member training and consultation workshop about our plans on the 26th of January. Members attended this live, as well as watching back the recording and feeding back separately. There was overwhelming support for the aims of this work and some suggestions of changes and new actions to be considered. As a result of this, the most significant changes are that we have created 2 new actions in the action plan, one in relation to AI, artificial intelligence, and engagement with young people about how this may impact their early stage careers and what opportunities there may be to respond positively and creatively to this. Another in relation to reviewing options on how, as a council, we could help to unlock greater affordable housing more quickly as a key challenge, particularly given we are a major landowner. This is in addition to the changes made to emphasise how this document aligns with the local growth strategy and therefore shows how this document fits into the wider policy context, whilst also being updated to reflect the council's strategic objectives. If approved today, we will bring a progress report to committee in a year's time with proposed new actions for consideration. This will enable us to continue the discussions we have started with members and officers across the council, as well as external organisations such as the NHS and Chambers of Commerce and others. We are mindful of the 2 years left for the County Council as an organisation ahead of local government reorganisation, and we are keen to start delivery of the action plan in order to make meaningful progress in this time. As previously explained, the actions have been designed with an eye to how they can create a positive legacy for the new unitary authorities that will exist from April 2028, and try to ensure that in whatever form the current strategy is reinvented in the future, there is a clear evidence base of the extent of the benefits that adopting these actions has on the local economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ethna. Questions? Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. We undoubtedly need to have a strategy, even if that strategy goes beyond the expected lifetime of this council. And there's nothing wrong at all with that. However, I have some issues with this. I'll mention a couple on the higher level and then one maybe on a lower level. Even in the introduction, in the executive summary, it talks about the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough local growth plan having the ambition to double the size of the local economy. And of course, the ambition is to treble the size of the local economy by 2050. That ambition has been changed. I've always believed that the ambition of doubling the size of local economy as measured by GVA over a long period of time is very unambitious, because probably that would happen anyway, regardless of any actions which were taken by the CPCA or by local councils, including this council. So I actually welcome the extended ambition and the, if I may use the phrase, the ambitious ambition to go for trebling rather than doubling. Yet this report still is talking about the old ambition of doubling. We talk here also about reducing existing inequalities, and I'm sorry to say that looking through this report generally, I don't see any significant effort being made to reduce the significant geographical equalities that there are within our own county. And when you compare the position so far as the index of multiple deprivation is concerned between, for example, Fenland in the north and South Cambridgeshire in the south, it is absolutely clear, as is mentioned in this report, that there is a large amount of inequality, but I really don't see an effective strategy even to begin to narrow the gap. And the likelihood is, in fact, that with greater growth taking place in Greater Cambridge and the Oxcam Arc, and the Oxcam Arc theoretically includes Fenland, but in practice doesn't. Given that, the only likely result is that there's going to be greater geographical inequality, regardless of what the ambition may be stated to be in this report. And the final thing I'd like to mention, which is at a lower level, but nonetheless important, is that we do have a direct impact on the local economy by the amount of council tax that we levy. And having a policy which effectively has turned out to be increasing the council tax by the maximum amount legally allowed every year, that is not helpful to the local economy, because it takes money out of the pockets of ordinary working people, of all families within Cambridgeshire. And I think there's no recognition of the fact that that is has a negative effect on the local economy and on people within the local economy. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. I will give Ethna an opportunity to respond on those in a moment if she wants to. But before she does, I'm going to make a couple of comments myself, because I think quite a few of those points that you were making sit in the political space rather than in the officers drawing up a strategy space. So the first one that you mentioned was the doubling of the size of the economy. The reference that you made to trebling it is a mayoral ambition. It is neither the combined authorities' ambition nor necessarily this council's ambition. So the ambition that is in there is the one that was agreed by this council. I'm quite sure that many of us, possibly not quite all of us, but many of us would be delighted if we overachieve on that doubling of the economy. But actually, I think in the situation of the world as it currently is, I don't think that it's necessarily going to be easy to double the economy in that timescale, and I think trebling it would certainly be very ambitious. I don't actually think that a figure that's quoted in this document is going to make an enormous difference in the grand scheme of things about whether we double or treble it. What we all need to do is to make sure that our place is in the best possible position to be able to grow and support our population. And I think this document is going to help with that. But in terms of that figure, whether we're aiming for doubling or trebling, the trebling was a mayoral ambition, and it is not one that's been recognised by all of the partners. I'm quite concerned by what you say about this document not its reference to reducing inequalities and not having anything in it to narrow the gap. I mean, I think that this authority and the combined authority are all very concerned about narrowing the gap. And I don't think that Fenland is only part of the Oxcam arc theoretically. I think it is very much part of that arc. There are some areas where the connections happen more easily than others. And I do recognise that it's harder for Fenland, but that's definitely something that we need, all of us, to be taking very seriously. And finally, the direct impact of council tax. I would say that the use of taxation to try and mitigate the inequalities that are felt by Fenland is a very important part of the work that we do. And I'm going to be particularly clear about that I think we were talking in our previous bit of discussion on the integrated finance report and the skills, the Connect to Work for skills, that access to work via public transport is a real barrier to people in Fenland, and it absolutely is. That access to work has been made a little easier for some people by things like the Tiger Pass. Those are not things that we control here. They're things that are controlled at the combined authority. But that spreading of the use of the resources of institutions like the combined authority to allow people to travel more cheaply or continue to have a bus service makes a big difference. Our council tax is not in that category. Our council tax is basically mostly going on social care, which is also extremely important for people right across the area and very important in reducing inequalities. I'm going to offer Ethna the opportunity to respond if she wants to, but if you don't feel you need to, then there's no obligation.
Thank you. Just some very brief comments, but we generally support what has just been said by you, Chair. This document does align with the published local growth plan, as Councillor Singer just said. In terms of trying to tackle the geographical inequalities, we've been working very closely with colleagues in the Policy and Insights team and also Public Health to understand those. The action plan has actions in there to target those. It doesn't then necessarily specifically name where we will do those, but that's not because we're not going to target those areas most in need. It's just they're not specifically cited in the action plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ethna. Yes, Chris, you may come back once.
Right. You're very kind, Lucy. Thank you very much indeed. And you raised an issue, you raised, not me, of the Tiger Pass and saying that's an example of managing to reduce inequality, but it's exactly the opposite. And I'm not accusing you or the administration at all of acting in bad faith, far from it. What I'm saying is that what you are doing isn't actually addressing the geographical inequalities which exist in practice. And the Tiger Pass is a good example. Because the bus services in Finland are so poor, the Tiger Pass take-up rate is massively lower. That's about 1/4 of the take-up rate that there is, for example, in Cambridge City. So the Tiger Pass has, in fact, advantaged areas of greater advantage and disadvantaged areas of greater disadvantage. It's actually increased the amount of inequality, geographical inequality that there is in Cambridgeshire rather than decreased it. So that's a good example of something which has been done in good faith and which you mentioned in good faith, but in practice, it has the effect of increasing the geographical disadvantage which already exists.
We're not here to have a discussion about Tiger Pass. I recognise your point about geographical disadvantage, but in terms of overall advantage or disadvantage, it is helping people who would otherwise find it more difficult to access work and employment. Lorna.
Thank you. I would just say on that last point that, of course, Fenland suffered the second greatest fall of any local authority in the country in the provision of bus services over a period of 20 years or so under successive governments. And therefore it is not surprising that Fenland and also large parts of East Cambridgeshire, where I live, are also suffering because the public transport system has collapsed. And that is not the fault of this authority or indeed of the combined authority. And I'm seeing many efforts made to try to address that deficit, which has been there and has been very much an issue in Finland for many years, and shouldn't be. The question I wanted to ask Ethna was something completely different, which is about the overall, what seemed to me the overall assumptions in the document that we've got, which is very good, that you are either economically active or you're not contributing to the economy. And I think that there is a whole group of people who are contributing considerably to the economy, even though they are not going to work. They're not alarm clock Britain, as Reform UK has decided to call them. They are, for example, grandparents who look after children so that their children can go to work and provide for the grandchildren and the families. There are family carers who take a huge burden off the state in terms of looking after people in their families. Burden is not the right word in many cases. It is done with love, it is done with care, but it is a contribution to the economy in the sense that it is minimizing or reducing the need for intervention, expensive intervention by the state. And I'm not clear that I'm asking for anything specific by way of an action plan on that, but I think what I'm asking for is a recognition of the economic contribution of people who are not classed by the statisticians as economically active, but also, I guess, wondering whether you've got any thoughts about whether or not there is something we can do that we're not doing at the moment to support the people who are making that economic contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly, it's not a particular feature. We haven't drawn that out in the document, I would agree. And that is something that could potentially be addressed. In terms of what we could sort of contribute or add that we're not already doing, this was raised by members, or it was clearly a concern among some members when we did the consultation. And we took the view that this would be sort of in the next wave of actions. We would go talk more closely and spend more time with members of officers around the authority who are most active in this to really determine if there was something in addition. But it is clearly quite a complex issue. And we didn't want to put an action in there which was a good intention but didn't really have the right grounding. So I would say that is a priority for our next round of actions, is how we would look at it. And we can't promise, therefore, that something would come forward, but we'll certainly look into it in detail.
Thank you. Elisa. And then
Hello. I mean, there's nothing in here that I don't like, and it's a very good document. I do have like a general question and possibly one that's a bit more specific. The general question, I suppose, is the two main things that I think in terms of local authorities actually having a formal statutory role that directly impacts the growth of the local economy, and whether you can make any informed not decisions, but like informed forecasts as to whether we're going to double or treble or 1.5 it or whatever. One is the economic growth itself, as is the portfolio of the combined authority in the skills remit, and the other one, of course, is our district's local plans. There are mentions in here of housing and support work with partners about this, that, and the other, which is all very good. But I would like to know what the relationship of this document is with the local plans and the specific economic work that is supposed to be done by the combined authority. And while of course I didn't want to, we don't need to go into whether the Tiger Pass or indeed the Tiger One or anything else is currently working very well or not. But we do know, obviously, that transport is a big contributor to economic growth or stunt thereof. Another responsibility of the combined authority is, of course, the transport strategy. Now, question number one is, how is this going to contribute to the combined authority delivering that? And what, in the nicest way of putting it, what work is going, because essentially the ultimate transport strategy will have to come out from the combined authority, and it will have to be extremely aligned to the local plan in the area in question. What are we going to do if that doesn't happen?
Thank you. In relationship to your first, in response to your first question about the relationship with local plans, obviously this is looking to be complementary and not in any way sort of overlap with those. It's looking for those opportunities that genuinely sit with us as an authority. And as set out in the committee paper as well, where we can do something that not only sits within our remit, but is, we have the capacity to do at the current time, or can envisage that there would be external funding to support us to do and would be appropriate. I would add it's quite a rapidly moving field on the local plan front in terms of, the recent consultation on development corporations. That could change a lot of how that whole planning landscape, depending on the decision that's taken on that front, amongst many other things. So I think it's a complex and moving field, and that is, this document's done its best to respond to it, but at any point in time, things will shift. We do have, in relation to transport, we do have one idea that one action that is in there about looking about a new idea that is an infrastructure delivery that may sit somewhere else in time, but we are looking at how we can help to reduce congestion, put in more cycle routes through something that is actually, that's action one. So that is an addition to all the planned activities within our transport teams remit. So that's the extent to which this action plan addresses it as a new action, but yeah, it doesn't go further than that. Emma.
Thank you, Chair. So just to add some additional comfort and confidence really to members, the combined authority is coming into a new statutory duty for a spatial development strategy. As part of that, we're already working closely with colleagues to really map out what that vision for the future is. And that's not only just across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but it's also looking at our neighbouring authorities, what the aspirations are in those wider, what we'll call SDSs, but also what the area would need to rely on, particularly in terms of water and energy and the like, to actually bring that vision forward. So I think it's going to be part of that wider piece. This really is focused in on what the County Council will be doing, as Ethna has said, but it will join all those elements up, transport being just one part of that bigger picture.
Thank you, Ethna and Emma. That is a very, very helpful answer to a difficult question. Thank you. I've got Ros and then Karen.
Yes, so I welcome this, and I welcome the focus on young people, because I think it is really difficult out there, and I think it is really important they know that their problems are being recognised and that we are focusing on work to address that. One thing that I'm becoming increasingly aware of is that the Combined Authorities Growth Strategy doesn't explicitly refer to education, and education is referred to in this document, but there is an education economy in this county. Lots of things flow from it, which we do see picked out in growth strategies, but actually education itself is absolutely critical to this. And this council is responsible for some areas of education, such as it has an adult skills role, and it has some schools, and it is closely integrated into the schools picture. But really recognizing the role and the importance of education is absolutely critical. And so it's another sort of, if there could be any recognition, and there is reference to education, but if that could be the central role of it could be in any way more clearly sort of expressed, and any actions flow from that would be something I would support.
Thank you, Ethna.
Yes, happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ros. Karen.
Thank you. So I'd like to say that I really like this report. It's really set out very clearly, and it is very good at setting out what the council can do and what it can't do. And I really like the action items as well. I think it's a very detailed and very thorough look at what we in the council can do. So my question basically is are all these actions they're included in our business plan and budget? And they're all kind of they're going to happen sort of thing.
They've all been sort of explored to the extent that we think there's a credible chance of them coming forward. They can either be done within existing resources, or that there are opportunities to apply for external funding. Obviously, we don't know if we'll be successful on those fronts. So it could be that some are good ideas but don't win the funding and therefore don't progress, or have to be revisited and slightly changed in order, as a result of that. So they are contingent on that, and they're not contributing to any budget sort of pressures or new requirements.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Ricky.
Chair, I'd just like to pick up on the comment in regards to Reform's Alarm Clock Britain. I agree, often grandparents do contribute to childcare, etc. But I would point out that they are the previous generation of Alarm Clock Britain. And if we had not had successive governments of the status quo, should I say, of managed decline, then families might still have had the option of having a parent able to choose to stay at home with one income being able to provide a comfortable lifestyle. Instead, what we have seen is, and what administrations have done, is effectively put our hardworking retirees back to work in a certain sense, as often these families don't have any other options, which I find unacceptable. And, I support economic growth, I support skills and productivity, but what I cannot support is strategies that baking vague ideological objectives with buzzwords such as inclusivity, community wealth building, circular economies, and net zero objectives without a costed plan and measurable outcomes. These phrases almost always translate into higher procurement costs, with more bureaucracy for employers, local employers, and politically driven initiatives that residents end up funding. What I'd like to have seen is a strategy focused on growth, productivity, and value for money with clear KPIs, with costs and accountability. And, if we had that, I would have engaged constructively. But as written, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's just a position statement rather than any particular question for Ethna. And I think we're happy to agree to differ on that, Ricky. Okay, I haven't heard anybody else speak against this, but we will clearly need to have a vote on whether we want to approve this economic strategy along with its accompanying action plan. And recommendation B is to delegate authority for any minor changes. So I'm hoping that we can take those two together. I'm happy to propose it from the chair. If I could have a seconder, please. Lorna's going to second. Thank you, Tamar. All those in favour of approving the economic strategy, if you could indicate now, please. Okay, and all those against? And any abstentions? I think that's one abstention. Elisa was supporting, yeah. So that's, I think, 9 in favour, 4 against, and 1 abstention. Thank you. Thank you very much. We will.
Chair, can I ask an extremely stupid question, but I'm going to be confused and keep thinking about it for the rest of the meeting. We've never done proposing and seconding. Is this a new thing, or do we have to? I was just surprised. Sorry, I had to scratch the itch in my brain.
Thank you. You are completely correct that in this, I don't need to do it. I won't do it again. I'm getting confused because I've been doing too many combined authority meetings. Excellent. Thank you for that. We don't need to do that. That's great. The next item on the agenda, and thank you, Ethna and Emma, for and what I think is an excellent piece of work. Thank you. Joe is doing the change portfolio report. Joe, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. So this report is one of our regular updates on the change portfolio. And this updates committee on the status of two of our change portfolios with a snapshot of the delivery position as at December 2025. Those two delivery portfolios are the Our Future Council portfolio and the Major Change portfolio. Just a quick overview of the position. Within the Our Future Council portfolio, there are currently 10 active programs and projects. 9 of these are reporting green and 1 of them reporting amber. And within the Major Change portfolio, there are 13 active programs and projects at present, with 7 reporting green, 2 amber and 4 red. 2 programs and projects in this portfolio have been closed and are marked as such. I'd just like to make a quick verbal correction to the RAG rating on the dashboard in relation to the Fostering Savings project. That should be presented as green for August, so the previous reporting period, but we've got a mix-up of colour and description in that, so it should be green for August. An overview of all of the red, amber and closed programmes and projects provided in the appendix to the report, and SROs are also present to pick up any particular questions that may arise from those. That's everything.
Thank you very much, Joe. Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy. Transformation has been a requirement for local government at all levels, at least for the last 18 years. It's the only way that we as local government have managed to survive. And it has also, when it's worked, improved services, sometimes at reduced cost. Transformation has been very valuable indeed. I look at this report and think transformation is in some difficulty now. Whilst we have to continue to operate as a council so long as this council exists, we can no longer in our own right plan for the long term. And the closer we get to whatever the vesting date is, and at the moment we believe it's the 1st of April 2028, but we don't really know, the closer we get to the vesting date, the more incongruous it will be to have an Our Future Council portfolio when our council doesn't have a future. And my fear is that items such as the Directorate restructure and redesign, things which would have made a great deal of sense had we been continuing to exist for another 5, 10, 15 years, increasingly make little sense when everything is going to be thrown up in the air and redesigned when we have local government reorganisation. Now, that's not to say that individual services shouldn't continue to be targeted for improvement, because those improvements can be carried over, with a bit of luck and with a lot of hard work, can be carried over into the new unitary authority regime. But overall, I personally believe that transformation is certainly threatened, not stopped entirely, but certainly threatened and becoming less and less effective because of local government reorganisation and because we cannot take a long-term view on this council if this council is not going to exist in the longer term. So that's the first point I'd like to make. I've got a very specific second point. Should I make that separately, Lucy? Right, and the second point is slightly contradictory to my first one, but never mind. Looking at the detail of the report, I am very disappointed about the hospital discharge pathways report that we've got in front of us. And saying that the vacancy in the key strategic development manager role has delayed the project, it is absolutely appalling. We have, again, this is not specific to Cambridgeshire, it's right across the country, but DETOC, you always go into health authority acronyms. Delayed transfer of care has been an issue for 15 years or more. And If it were a simple issue to solve, it would have been solved a long, long time before now. It is difficult. It involves a number of different agencies, and it involves a number of different organizations which think too much in silos rather than working together. If it was simple to solve, it would have been solved a long time ago. And I know how difficult it has been. And I also know people within the health side of the equation who are very committed to try to help solve it. And it is very disappointing that we, not just in Cambridgeshire, but right across the country, are still in the position that we are as far as delayed transfer of care is concerned. And I'm really disappointed that we have let the side down here in terms of the whole system by not having the strategic development manager, meaning that we haven't been able to play our full part in progressing work on delayed transfer of care and of having appropriate hospital discharge pathways. That's a real failure on our part on a major issue which has a lot of cost to the system as a whole. Much of that cost, I have to say, lands on the healthcare side rather than our side, but we should be looking at this in a joint way, both as our cost of social care and also the NHS cost so far as healthcare is concerned. And for us to have had a failure there by having a vacancy when I would have hoped there would be individuals who would have been competent within our existing organisation to be able to fulfil that role, at least in part and probably to a great extent. I find that really, really disappointing, and a lack of focus on something which, from a system-wide point of view, really is important. So I'm really disappointed about that. Again, that's a good example of how, in the short term, we can actually manage to make a difference, which goes against what I was saying before. But increasingly, as we come towards that cliff edge of the vesting date, transformation will be very difficult for us to do, and certainly organizational transformation will have less and less value. But we can't stop doing the service transformation work because one hopes that will be able to be carried forward. So my question is it accepted that we do have a problem with effective continuing transformation, especially on an organizational side, when we do have local government reorganisation coming up? And what on earth can we do to reprioritise the hospital discharge pathways urgently?
I think I'm going to ask Patrick, who has come forward, to talk about the hospital discharge one, and then I will talk about the other one, unless Joe or Stephen want to say anything.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the hospital discharge, I think as a council, from a social care perspective, we are performing really well. We don't have the levels of delays that we've had previously. We don't have the levels of delays that are reported elsewhere in the country. We have a really strong reablement service that supports people out of hospital. We have a strong and buoyant care market, so that means the flows of patients leaving hospital are supported effectively and through a reablement pathway, and then are able to be supported into the care market, because often if you're struggling to source longer term care packages, that can create a blockage, and therefore the delays increase. This particular piece of work is in relation to the whole system, and it's being led by the ICB around reviewing particular pathways. So pathway 1 is in effect where people go home, usually with support, could be short term, could be longer term. The work has identified here that people are being discharged through pathway 2 and 3, often by other decision makers, which is an incorrect pathway. So people could end up in a residential bed for longer than they need to, become institutionalised, and therefore can't easily return home. So the work is trying to shift from pathway 2s and 3s into pathway 1. There has been some real challenges within the system. Part of that has been around that strategic worker that was identified in this report. But the second point is that the dependency on the system-wide work has had the bigger impact on shifting the resources. Whenever the hospitals are in crisis, and they refer to them being self-inoperable measures, which is an escalation measure of being in black, we often respond to their support because we've got capacity and we work their other systems. Other partners in the system often have blockages, often have people extending beyond their period of care and staying there. So I would say that we are effective in our hospital discharge arrangements. This particular report is in relation to an improvement project which relates to a system-wide response, and there are a number of factors, one around money, one around freeing monies up from the acute trust, one is around redirecting certain funds, which is having an impact on that. And there is an aspect of that which is around the strategic development manager, which will help us to have some oversight. But in terms of delays, current delays and current pressures within the hospital system, adult social care is performing really well. We have a really good performance around people 91 days after discharge still being at home with care. So I would want to assure committee that we don't have a pressure within the hospital discharge, it's the whole system, and it's incorrect pathways that this work is trying to improve. And doing so should free up some financial resources, because if we can get people home with the right support, that often reduces some of the long-term cost pressures that we see as a system.
Thank you, Patrick. That's very thorough. I think Stephen wants to add something.
Thank you, Chair. Patrick's given a very thorough and helpful explanation, and Councillor Bowden's obviously right to highlight the issue. Of course, the post that's referenced talks about the speed of the project, doesn't say the project as a whole is delayed, so it's merely about how fast that can be moved forward. However, Patrick's right to highlight this work is being led by the Integrated Care Board, who, as we all know, are currently in a state of flux, is probably my politest description of how the NHS Integrated Care Boards currently are. Perhaps using the opportunity to say to committee, yesterday I met with Baroness Louise Casey, who's currently leading the National Review for Adult Social Care, and providing yet more recommendations to government on how to potentially try and address some of the long-standing issues around the social care sector. As part of the discussion with Baroness Casey, she was making the point that there have now been 22 successive commissions, reports and other forms of national investigation into adult social care, none of which have particularly moved forwards because no government of the day seems to have grasped those particular issues sufficiently. I think the key point I would make is that Baroness Casey quite rightly points out in some of her initial findings, and she's about to embark on a period of public consultation as part of her commission's work. She quite rightly has highlighted that community services have been hollowed out over the last 15 years, which means that the NHS is fundamentally, as she described it yesterday, a national hospital service, not a national health service. And I think she's absolutely accurate with that assessment. The lack of community-based provision, the lack of NHS workforce in primary and community-based care working alongside social care is fundamentally the problem we have. So delayed transfers of care is an issue nationally, but actually it's admission avoidance we want to have greater focus on, in my view. So Patrick and I have spoken to the ICB on numerous occasions about this, because we actually think they're reviewing entirely the wrong pathways for the wrong reasons. They should start with pathway 0, which helps actually get people into hospital in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you both. The other part of your point, Chris, I'm going to respond on, and if Joe or Stephen want to come in afterwards, they're very welcome. And I think what I'm going to say is that I actually think it's incredibly important that we do not allow the irritating chaos that local government reform is causing for us all to stop work with making this organisation and our partner organisations more effective and efficient. We have to keep doing that, otherwise it will be a failure for our residents. The way in which we do that will need to change as we go through that process. And one of the things that I was going to say in a slightly different context, and I might still say it separately in a minute, is that I think this document, the way it's presented, is really helpful. I think it would probably also be helpful if there was some indication in there about which of these projects are completely within county council control and which are with partners. So the one you've just been mentioning is clearly one which is also with the NHS and the ICB, and that makes it more difficult for us to have complete ownership of delivery of it. I would anticipate that over the coming 18 months, more and more of the things on this chart will be with partners, because we will need to be doing them in partnership. We will need to be reshaping and transforming our services in partnership with the district councils and the combined authority, and probably other partners as well, in order to make sure that our services are in a fit shape for that transition. But that transition work is going to be just as important, if not more important, as that happens, and practicing doing it well now will be helpful in terms of getting us into that space where we do it with our colleagues in other places. And I think that transition work sort of has already started in that we've got a new appointment who's been made across all of the organisations to sort of lead that work, but it's clearly not a job for one person. It's going to be the work of all of our councils across the whole of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area, and we are all going to need to concentrate and spend, I suspect, sadly, an even greater amount of time thinking about it over the next 2 years than we have done over the past 2 years. So in a sense, I think this is even more important given LGR. It's just that we will need to do it slightly differently, and that working that clarity about what that we're doing this with our partners in our place will be increasingly important. So Joe, maybe an action point could be to try and indicate a bit. I do think it's a really well set out document, and I think it's beautifully clear, but having a bit more clarity about who are the partners we're working on each of these projects, I think would be really helpful. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Chris, you can come back. That's
Thank you. I very much appreciate and agree with the comments which have been made. I'm just highlighting the challenge that disaggregation will create for us. And it will particularly, in my view, create a challenge after the shadow authorities are created, because it is perfectly possible, in fact, I would think it is quite likely, that we will find that there will be different approaches, different priorities for different unitary authorities, which are going to be the successor to the existing 7 authorities in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And that process, the management of that process and the management of the disaggregation from our side, I think is going to be incredibly difficult. I think it's going to be incredibly disruptive. I think it's going to be very costly. And I think it will knock transformation to some extent, because we will lose some of the focus that we otherwise would have had, given the limited capacity that we've all got. We'll lose some of the focus on service delivery and service change. And I know we'll concentrate on service delivery, but service change in particular may suffer as a result of the lack of capacity and the fact that we need to deal with that disaggregation.
I can see Stephen does want to respond on that one.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, to say to Councillor Bowden, I agree with those observations. I think the more people are starting to reflect on the fact that we need to manage transition rather than transformation over the next 2 years is probably going to be the issue we'll have to focus on. We do need to deliver some of the changes built into the County Council's own business plan, as will the other 6 authorities within their own plans, but we will clearly also be looking at what we need to do between now and the 1st of April 2028 to deliver LGR effectively and safely. But at the same time, we have obviously to deliver our existing statutory duties and deliver a balanced budget. So, as you say, managing all of those tensions will be extremely difficult. But I suspect the phrase I would consistently now use around LGR is, rather than trying to do too much transformation, can we focus on transition and making that safe and legal? I suspect that's not just a matter elected members want to consider. Some of my fellow chief executives perhaps are more optimistic in their assessment of how much we can transform things pre-vesting day for new authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Elisa, sorry.
Just very briefly to pick up on what's been said just now, and then I do have 2 specific questions. I mean, transformation is a game of diminishing returns. You can only keep transforming the same thing for so long. And we have been doing it for 16 years, and it has been necessary to do it for 16 years. What will happen in the next 16 years, we will see. But, you know, I made no secret of my position at the last budget meeting that I do think it's, at this point in time, given what we're facing, we have to stop transforming and start transitioning. And I think that's a completely appropriate thing to do. We can moan about the need to transition. This will cost us. It will be difficult. But, you know, the more you moan about it, the more you have to decide, you know, did you actually want to carry on the way we were? Was that sustainable? Was that great? Was everything working perfectly fine with service delivery? And were there no obstacles when people kept going to their city councillors and telling them they need to fill potholes and all the rest of it? You know, you do have to manage compromise in these things. So I'm really hoping that, you know, post-vesting and everything will get slightly better. That's the hope anyway. But I do have 2 questions, and it's helpful, I suppose, that Chris focused on hospital discharges, because I wanted to focus on the other 2. First one, the inclusion for all item, which it does sort of talk about the one-off investment that was made and the new starters that are coming into post and all the rest of it. Now, I wasn't the one that brought forward the business plan amendment to make that one-off investment longer. How is the business plan over the MTFS planning for this action? Because my understanding from last month was that we're not actually going to carry on with that investment. So if we are, and if I misunderstood something, that would be great. But my other question about the Inclusion for All work stream was whether we have started doing any work about the impact that the most recent SEND white paper is going to have on this, and whether the hopeful signs that we will have some of our debt written off, or not written off, but paid for us, and the work that will come in relation to that will influence, perhaps improve our ability to increase, to remove this action from being read. So that's the first question. The second question is the in-house service review. Now, I'm going to channel my colleague Richard, who is probably the most passionate advocate for this in the entire council, and he is very frustrated that this wasn't done while he was in charge, and he's very frustrated that this isn't happening now that he's not in charge. The analysis, it says what it says. There's nothing you can do about it. But my question really is, how much analysis are we doing of whether the investment is worth it for service delivery later? Because this is too expensive and we don't want to do it. It's an excuse you hear far too much. Can you afford not to do it? And is it sustainable the way it is now? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come to Martin first and then Patrick.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so within the budget there was the one-off amount of money, but there was also permanent investment of £720,000, which will be continued year on year, and that investment is starting to show some signs of improvement. So, of the first half of last year to the second half of last year, we saw a 51% increase in the number of education healthcare plans that we were able to complete. And we saw an increase to the last quarter of 25, where the timeliness of those was about 22%. So seeing some early green shoots of that investment paying off, but we still must acknowledge that there are still a lot of families waiting in the queue for their assessments. So that timeliness will fluctuate. But if we can being able to increase our output by 51% was a big success, and meant that we could certainly make sure more families got their plans concluded. The service is launched a consultation yesterday on a wholesale education service redesign. The principle of that is to increase the capacity in the SEND and SAT service. So that will do so, and it will do so within the budget that we are already allocated. So it will not require that additional funding. Regarding the white paper, the analysis that we've done so far is that Inclusion for All actually aligns very well with many of the headline reforms that are in there. And we are also quite optimistic and excited that it will help us on our Inclusion for All journey. Regarding the funding for that, I think that remains unclear. I'd look to Michael if he wanted to share any comment, but I think it remains unclear how they're going to calculate the 90% of the high needs block deficit, which they will cover the cost of. Is that fair to say, Michael? Yeah, Michael's nodding. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Very helpful, Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. So just to remind committee that the in-house review was concluded during the period of the joint administration when Councillor Howitt was the committee chair. That way it was concluded. There were certain recommendations in there. Some of the recommendations were that when you look at the offer of some of the services that we provide, things such as respite, the external market, whether that's run by the private, voluntary or community sector, can offer an equal but more competitively priced product. So they also made recommendations that there were other areas such as shared life services that actually the council offers currently and could expand, and that's some of our plans. The problem we've had is that the structure of the in-house service that we currently had needed a review, and we've just concluded that. That's part of a current consultation that's happening. Once the structure is concluded, then we will move into a period of review of the services that we offer. not with a view to stopping those services, but to with a review to making them as effective and efficient as possible. Some of the services we've got a greater take-up of those services, and we're seeing a greater demand on that. Other services continue to be challenging because there are other competitive services where people choose to go to, and we support them to access those services. The other bit which we need to think about is whether or not, as a council, we offer a more of a bespoke service for those people who have higher levels of acuity and more complex needs, and how do we support them more effectively with some of the services that we provide. If you look at it on a pure cost basis, at times the council is more expensive than a competitor, but actually what you can do is you can shape the service to offer a greater level of support for individuals, with upskilling staff to be able to support those people. So that will be part of our work. So I want to assure you that the reason that it's delayed and why it's included within this programme as being in a red state is that we've had to go through a period of restructure of the service before we can move into the consideration of the different range of services that we offer, because as part of the in-house review, they looked at reablement, they looked at respite, shared lives, supported living services and day services. So there's a big spectrum of work that was undertaken as part of that review with a number of recommendations. So we will be looking to, we've implemented some of those recommendations. One is around the structure, but there are other recommendations that we are looking to implement, which is why it's slipped, but we anticipate to do that within the coming financial year 26-27.
Thank you. Mark.
If I can come in on the inclusion for all situation, Martin, the seeds of recovery are coming through, but I want to be realistic about this. That you say we've got a 52% increase on those that we were able to do. That's got us to 18%. The 52% increase has got us to an 18% hit rate. So therefore, 82% people are still not getting serviced in time, on time. You also say that we put this money in and we're seeing that that's having a direct result. So that's a political decision to put this money in as making a small inclusion. So therefore, a political decision to not put more money in and do more is not helping the 82% that aren't getting seen. Now, I recognise that there's an awful lot of people coming through wanting an assessment, requesting assessment, and that increased demand on the service is massive. But I underline this, and I've said this at CYP, we are now setting a stretch goal of 48%, which, let's be clear about that, that means that 52% of the people won't meet the 20-week deadline, right? But that's our goal now. Why is that our goal? Because that's what the national average is. I think that's really unambitious. I think that's really a lack of care for the people that are in the system. I've said all of this at other meetings, but I couldn't really have, Martin, to be fair, the 52% being the last thing that's floating on the ether there. 52% increase is great. We need, a 400% increase to get anywhere near what our target is. And this money is going to drop out, as Elise, Councillor Machini said. This money's not there forever and a day. So I really am worried about the next iteration of this overall report. We can't have any other colour than red, but I am really worried about the ability for this to be a success of the Inclusion in All SEND project.
Martin.
Thank you very much. I mean, a comment from an officer side on that. I think if I want to go back to the fact that we are launching this consultation about the service review and redesign, I think we do have a responsibility to make sure that we are using all of our resources to the best that we can to target what is one of our highest priority areas. So when we've completed that, we'll be able to see exactly how much of an improvement that will also bring us. So that's our responsibility as officers, to make sure that we're using all of our resources as best they can before anything else.
I'm just going to add something to that because I think it's really important. So I agree with your concern about the level of timeliness of REHCPs. Clearly, everyone in this room wants to improve the timeliness of REHCPs. The current situation is a bit of a crisis. I mean, it kind of is a crisis. It's a crisis in this council. It's a crisis in lots of other councils. But the other thing that I want to say that I think is incredibly important in this space is that some of the changes that have been made in the way in which our children's services are managing things mean that we are not waiting until children have got EHCPs before we are getting support to children and their families. And that is an absolutely critically important point to make. And it is also absolutely the direction of the new white paper that's just come out, that families need to get support at the point at which they need support. And the most important thing for us to be doing is to be getting support to those families as early and as appropriately as we possibly can. We also need to be improving our EHCP numbers. But for me, the most important thing is actually to make sure that our families are getting the support that they need. And I wouldn't want us to be only focusing on the ability to get those EHCPs through in a timely way. I think it's just as important that we focus on getting families support before they have those EHCPs. And one of the things that I think we need to be looking at is to see whether some of those EHCP numbers, the numbers that are coming into the system reduces because we're getting support to families early. Because in some ways, if you get the right support to families early enough, not all of them will feel they need to go down the EHCP route. And that is one of the things that I think we need to be watching just as carefully, if that makes sense. Yes, you can come back.
Thank you, Lucy. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. But what I would like to add on that is the primary school in my own village is £76,000 over budget because it has stepped in to fill the void whilst it's waiting for the assessments. Now, if you extrapolate that out over and that's a non-maintained school, it's not a non-trust school, right? But if you extrapolate that out, and education is trying to fend, some education is not. Some education is saying it's not my problem, we need help, right? But the majority of education is trying to get in and help and support, and they haven't got the money for it, right? So these children can't get the support that they want because they can't get it. If they can't get it from us, they certainly can't get it from the schools because they haven't got the money there to fund the one-to-one support that they need. And I'll go back to, you know, we wait all this while for these assessments and they're right and they're proper and they're all done well. But actually, do you know what? A life experience, special education's needs teacher or even a TA, they know. They know whether these children need the help or need the support or not. And that's where we should be focusing more on. So I just go back to my point, which is I think to make Inclusion for All for a success, I think we need to be more ambitious. I think it needs to be raised up the political table of events. I'll share an example. I think there are fractionally, I can't quote the actual numbers, but I think there are fractionally more officers working on EHCP applications than we have in our communications team at the council. That's a political choice. That's absolutely our choice. Well, the choice of many people in this room, shall I say. So what I'm saying is to fix this major problem, we need to be much more ambitious and much more in touch and in day-to-day contact with our educationalists to get these children through this crisis that they're in at the moment.
So I do need to respond on that. I don't recognise that figure that you've just said about the number of people working on EHCPs versus the number of people working on communications in this council. I think if you want to sustain that, you'll have to provide some evidence for it. The other thing I will say is that if we could recruit any more educational psychologists, my goodness, we would. We are not having more educational psychologists because we don't want to recruit them. They are not there. So in terms of the one of the key barriers to getting EHCPs done quickly is the lack of educational psychologists, and that is a national problem. In terms of the support that you were talking about in schools and the difficulty that in particular Cambridgeshire schools have in providing the right level of support to children in schools, I completely recognise that problem. And one of the things that really worries me about the white paper is the assumption that schools will be able to provide more support, and the numbers in terms of the amount of money that the government is putting in and the amount that is going to feed into schools do not add up. And I think that they particularly do not add up in a place like Cambridgeshire, where our schools are very, very poorly funded in comparison with the rest of the country. And I can promise you that that is something that I will be lobbying hard about, because the new emphasis on more of this provision being provided through schools can only work if our schools have the support that they need to do it. And at present, our school budgets are in a very, very difficult position. And part of that is because there are still enormous disparities in the level of funding, of per pupil funding across the country, and that is not right. So we will be following up on that, and I'm very happy to send more letters if the committee would like me to do that. But it is it's a really significant issue. But there are things that we can do as a council to support schools better at the stage before a child has an EHCP, for example, with speech and language therapy and things like that, where actually we can make sure that support can come in more quickly. And in some circumstances, when it does, it can mean that children make the progress that they need to make in order not to need an EHCP. And that's the outcome I think we all would like. Any further questions or comments on this paper? I don't see any more. So I'm just going to go back to the point I made quite a long time ago, which is that I think this is a really good format for being able to read this. I think we've had a good debate about some really important issues for the council. If you could make the small change about partnerships, that would be brilliant. But otherwise, we are asked to note and comment on, I think, we're recommended to review and scrutinise the council's change portfolio, which I think we have done. So thank you everyone very much for that. And thank you to Martin and Patrick for being here to answer questions. The next item on the agenda is the corporate risk register, and welcome Mairead.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is our regular report on the corporate risk register. I would highlight within the report that we've seen reductions in scores in 2 corporate risks. So that is risk 3, the risk that the council does not have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium term corporate objectives, has significantly reduced from a risk score of 20 to 12. The Executive Director of Finance and Resources has provided some detail on the background for this at section 3.4.1. And then at the same time, risk 7, which is the risk of failure to deliver key council services, has also decreased slightly from a score of 10 to a score of 8. And the Chief Executive has provided context at 3.4.2. We also have a new corporate risk, which has been escalated to the corporate risk register with the agreement of CLT. This is risk 15, the risk of non-delivery of SEND statutory timelines, financial risk of the DFE safety valve agreement for Cambridgeshire, and increase in DSG spend. There's some information on this at section 3.5.1, and I would just flag to the committee that the school's white paper and the information on the government's planned SEND reforms was released very shortly before the deadline for these papers, and as such, the extent to which there has been an opportunity to respond to the impact of the reforms and the extent to which that is reflected within that item in the risk register is low. Children Education and Families Directorate, working with the Assistant Chief Executive Service, is in the process of assessing that new information available about the planned reforms, and it's likely that that will have an impact then on corporate risk 15. We also have a confidential appendix, Appendix 8. So just to note, any questions on that would need to be done separately, but other than that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mairead, and thank you for drawing attention to the confidential appendix. We will stay in public session for now, but if things need to move in, if people do want to discuss the confidential appendix, we will need to move into private session, and I will do that at that point. And I'm sure someone will tell me whether we're getting close to that, but let's, for now, hope that we can discuss this in public. Chris and then Elliot.
Thank you very much indeed, Lucy, and thank you as ever, Mairead, for the work which you do here. It's worth our while, Lucy, remembering that this exercise, the risk register and the management of risk, it doesn't belong to Mairead. It doesn't even belong to the officers. It actually belongs to us as members. So we have to have confidence that what we have in front of us is accurate and it has been adequately challenged, and that it accurately reflects both what we believe the situation to be in terms of risk and also what our risk appetite is. And at some stage or other, it will be appropriate for us to re-examine our risk appetite on things to see if we may have different risk appetites for certain different risks that we see at the moment here. My particular questions are on risk 3 and risk 7. Risk 3, which is that the council doesn't have enough budget to deliver agreed short and medium-term corporate objectives, has had a reduction in score from 20 to 12. And that reduction has been on a reduction in the consequence score from 5 to 4. Now, I can actually see evidence which is given to us why the likelihood might have been reduced, but I can't see the evidence that the consequence of not having enough budget has been reduced. And I just wonder whether that the analysis of likelihood happening and the consequence has really been looked at in the right way there. And the same applies to risk 7. On risk 7, if you'll pardon me just taking a few seconds to scroll down, risk 7, the failure to deliver key council services, we've had a reduction there from 10 to 8 in our score. And again, it's a reduction of the consequence rather than a reduction of the likelihood. And I can see a reason for reducing the likelihood. I can't actually see a reason why the consequence of our failure to deliver key council services is less now than it was 3 months ago or 6 months ago. The consequence remains the same. So I'd just like an explanation, and I do appreciate that what we're seeing here is just the tip of a pyramid of risk analyses, and there's an awful lot which goes underneath this, which we don't see, and thank goodness we don't have to analyse all the stuff which goes underneath. But I think that the challenge on 3 and 7 and about why the consequence in 3 and 7 has been reduced is one which I'd very much appreciate Mairead answering. And finally on 15, the new one, the one about SEND, I think it would be massively valuable to us if, rather than waiting for the next meeting of our committee, once an analysis has been done as a result of the changes which there have been over the last month, if that could be circulated to members of this committee by email, I think that would be really valuable because it's so important.
Thank you. I have a feeling that Michael may be going to respond on those ones rather than Mairead. So.
Thank you, Chair. And certainly in relation to risk 3, of which some element knocks onto risk 7. And apologies for not making that clearer in the context, because it is likelihood and consequences when we look at the position, particularly relation to the impact upon reserves. Not forgetting that is what would trigger myself having any consideration with other statutory officers and then reporting to council a section 114 requirement. We look at particularly the position around the funding certainty now and the in-year position which we've just discussed on today's agenda. There isn't the draw from reserve that we may have felt. But significantly, and as the Executive Director for Children, Education and Families referred to earlier, the position around the SEND deficit, whilst still uncertain that it is actually 90% will be what materialises when all is said and done, is a significant reduction in the assumed level of potential carry forward debt, and therefore the consequences on the level that will be drawn from our reserves is not only an improved likelihood, but it's an improved consequence, because we already have a level of reserves that is sufficient to cover this year's overspend, future funding gap elements, and the SEND element. It's not perfectly balanced, but it's a lot better than it was when we previously reported to this, and indeed since we reported to council in February of this year.
I'll carefully think about that answer, Lucy.
Thank you. Elliot.
Good morning still. Yes, firstly, thank you for this report. It's really interesting, goes into a lot of depth. I'm glad that potential updates to risk 15 were acknowledged. That was something I was going to ask about. I think that, as a lot of people in this room undoubtedly agree, the SEND issues that are facing councils up and down the country are a really major concern. And I think it's really great national government is taking action. I haven't managed to fully read through plans, I'll be honest, so I still need to assess my own thoughts on what changes are being made. I understand that officers need time, sorry, to properly consider what impacts will be on this council. I was wondering if I could push for any information on what assessments have been made up till this point. Has anything substantive been found out that you're able to say? Because it has been a few days, and I imagine because officers have been working hard on this, a few conclusions may have been drawn.
So thank you. I can't comment on that, but I think Martin probably is best placed to do so.
Thank you. It's an excellent question. I can say that me and officers have been to numerous briefings from the Department of Education, both nationally and locally, and the information coming through is also changing from day to day. So the WHO is convening the assessment of our local plans. It seems to be changing to the ICB. From the local authority. So there's a lot more questions than there are answers at the moment, which is probably the best way to put it. There isn't a clear plan for us yet. We first of all have to do a local maturity assessment about our partnership, and we have to submit a plan, a partnership plan, to the Department of Education before the end of June. So those two pieces of work will be what informs our direction of travel. As I said earlier, what we know is that the reforms are very aligned to inclusion for all. So I imagine there will be changes. There will be a direction of travel away from inclusion for all in some areas, but some areas are very, very aligned. So if you want to look at inclusion for all, that will give you a good idea of the direction of travel. But in direct response to this white paper, no, there's nothing yet substantive that I could give you. The partnership has to do, first of all, its maturity assessment and then submit a plan, which will be shared with officers and members.
Thank you. I think Stephen might add a couple of points as well. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Tong for the question. I think officers have been working hard to assess the government's schools white paper and obviously the associated SEND reforms. I think I would sit here and say, as at best, cautious welcome of what we're reading into it so far. I would just comment that some of the requirements that Martin's talked about in terms of a local delivery plan aren't just the responsibility of the council, will be really clearly requiring the NHS to play their part, which is why the two secretaries of state actually wrote to councils and integrated care boards so that the health system is compelled to respond in the way that it normally does, as in by diktat from the centre, which is usually the only way to get it to do anything. But I do think having the ICB helping develop the work we've already been doing since our joint inspection by CQC and Ofsted will be useful. A point that we're obviously very clear about is that the high needs block deficit, government is indicating that it intends to write off some 90% of the existing deficit. And as members will be aware, this council was heading towards a potential high needs block deficit of circa 100 million by the end of this financial year. That figure obviously being reduced by 90% would make a considerable difference to the ongoing sustainability of this authority, but clearly would be significantly helpful for any future successor councils as well. The challenge, of course, is meeting the thresholds and tests that the government are now fitting around the requirements to get that 90% payoff in effect, which is the plan that Martin's described. Whilst I can focus on the financial elements, actually I think the bit that we do need to focus on is the reform elements, which speak to some of the points actually Councillor Goldsack was raising in earlier debate. So this is about increasing the provision and support in mainstream settings, looking at greater preventative support for children and young people who may have additional or special educational needs and disabilities. And I think the government's intention to invest, if my memory serves, circa 7 billion will helpfully move some of that forward. However, that investment isn't coming through particularly quickly. So if I remember correctly, government accounts or Treasury's funding statements show that the 7 billion only starts to kick in from 27-28, So in the meantime, they will have to fund SEND reforms very carefully during the course of the coming financial year. I do think finally on the elements of improving outcomes, the fact government's setting out a 10-year transition plan, in effect a 10-year reform programme, is probably the most positive thing, because clearly parents, carers, children and young people, schools and professionals working in SEND were all really concerned about the potential for these reforms to effectively create a cliff edge. That is not going to happen. EHCPs will continue. They will have to run concurrently alongside the newly proposed ISPs that are set out in the SEND reform. So the complexity will be running 2 SEND services or 2 SEND systems until such point as government takes on greater direct responsibility for it in 2028. We will be issuing a briefing note to all members next week on the sort of officer assessment of the white paper. So a good opportunity for me to mention that the policy team are already working on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very
Hey,
much.
am I able to come back on that briefly? I just want to thank officers for that information. I have been reading the headlines and some of the large proposals in the very sort of high level sense, but I haven't really managed to get into that detail. And I think when it comes to large changes like this, the detail is the most important thing. So it's really great to know we will be provided with a briefing note to really get that perspective on how it's going to tangibly impact the work of the council. So really excited for that.
Thank you. I don't see other hands up on the risk register. So I think, again, we are asked to note this one, and I think we have noted it and commented on the content. So thank you very much, Mairead. And the final item on our agenda, no, it's not almost the final item on our agenda, is the corporate performance report, which is Joe.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides committee with its agreed performance monitoring scorecard covering period Q3 of 25-26. I'll just give a quick run through of some of the highlights. So the scorecard attached in Appendix 1 includes the strategic key performance indicators reported across each of the Council's policy and service committees, with Appendix 2 included in the strategic key performance indicators that form the base of the scorecard for the metrics which are the responsibility of this committee. Taken in the round, and particularly when considered alongside other reports that we've received today, such as the risk register and the IFMR, the performance report is designed to give members a holistic view of organisational health and delivery. As set out at 2.6 in the report, SKPIs are rated according to a RAG regime, whereby red indicates performance that is 10% or more off target, amber indicates performance is off target by less than 10%, and green indicates performance is on target or exceeding target. Where currently possible, SKPIs are benchmarked against national and regional comparators to give that wider perspective and context. In summary, as at the end of Q3, across the 87 SKPIs reported in the scorecard, 13% were red, 20% were amber, 39% were green. 26% of metrics are categorised as contextual metrics and do not have a RAG applied. As set out at 3.6, the period-to-period change in the direction of travel across these metrics shows 42% improving, 39% declining, and 12% as unchanged or within range. Of the 10 SKPIs that form the SRP committee scorecard, 80% are reporting green, 10% as amber, and 10% as baseline. Committee is recommended to scrutinise the report and the scorecard and comment on the performance.
Thank you, Joe. Karen.
Thank you. So on page 199, we've got a description of the Council's carbon footprint. And it's declining, which is lovely. But I had a question about the blue bits, which are the oil and gas use. What are we using oil and gas for?
Blue.
I'll try my best. I'm not sure about oil, but gas will be for heating.
Michael, do you want to pick it up?
Yeah, Chair, through you. Likewise, we do still have a number of oil heated properties as well.
Thank you. Lee, thank you. Any other questions, Chris?
Thank you, Lucy. A couple of questions. The first one really is for you. We're told in terms of the total number of KPIs that 35 are improving and 33 are declining. Is that the level of progress that one would hope for? Whilst obviously it's better than the other way around, it is a little bit worrying that you've almost got as many declining KPIs as you've got improving KPIs. And the second point is, I was a bit disappointed that, again, we're very far behind with some of the information that we get in this committee, and particularly on highways, transport and connectivity, where a lot of the information we've got is only second quarter information, which is a long time ago, really now, and I would have hoped for a little bit more up to date. And I noted that I was particularly interested to see how the highways and transport indicator 7, that is the percentage of category 1 and category 2 defects repaired in line with highways operating standards. I would be very interested to see how that had changed up until the end of December, let alone since then. We've only got up to the end of October, but even then it's gone down from 96% to 89%. And it is an area which a lot of people are complaining about right across the county. And as I say, I haven't got the information I was hoping to see, though, about something which is more up to date than October. But that surely is something which we should be more than well aware of. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think you rightly said that to some extent those were for me, although I can see that Lee has come to the table. In terms of the number that are improving and the number that are declining, obviously it would be wonderful if far more of them were improving than declining. So it's not ideal. I think we do need to be aware that not all of these are things that are within the control of the county council. So I was looking down the red indicators. Like you, I also looked at the category 1 and 2 ones. But a number of these are not things that are necessarily within our control. So I think when we're thinking about which are improving and which are declining, we need to be mindful that some of these are things that we control and some aren't, and just taking them as those kind of broad overviews doesn't necessarily reflect that. In terms of the specific one you mentioned about the category 1 and 2 defects repaired, I will be astonished if that is not read the next time this comes forward. I think we are all extremely well aware at this council of what has been going on in our roads this winter. It has been a very, very difficult winter in terms of highways maintenance. I think, I mean, it's been very difficult in Cambridgeshire. It's been very difficult in a lot of places. But yes, none of us are unaware of that problem. Alex, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, Chris, you are right to flag this one, and you are right, Lucy, that the direction of travel will be significantly worse than that when we look at January and February. Obviously, the thing to say about that particular indicator is it is a reliance on our contractor to be fixing the repairs within the required time frame. And we have been doing, as I'm sure Lee could attest to, a lot of work with the contractor on that, and they are very highly aware of the scale of the issue right now. And that is where we now see a record 30 crews out fixing potholes at the moment to try and deal with that. So I think we are right that that indicator showing that the repairs are not being carried out within the timeframes that we specify within our contract is a challenge right now. But there is a lot of active management going on in that, and it is being taken very, very seriously.
Thank you, Lucy. And well aware this is a meeting of the Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee, and it's not a meeting of Highways and Transport. I fully accept that, but nevertheless, it is a matter which has been very much at the forefront of many of our residents' minds over the course of the last few months. And I was surprised to see, and of course I didn't see it directly from the County Council website, I was surprised to see a Freedom of Information request data which came back from Highways and Transport, covering the months of October, November, December and January. That's for 4 months. And in that Freedom of Information request, it stated that I see Councillor Beckett's putting his hand up already. I see in that we identified 10 potholes in that 4-month period where the work had not been done adequately, and we asked the contractor to do it again. Now, 10 potholes when we do 55,000 potholes a year, if I've got the number right, and for only 10 to have been found in the 4-month period not to have been adequately done, is remarkable. But then you cross-check that against the percentage of pothole repairs that we're meant to be examining and checking on. And that's meant to be a 5% figure. Now, if that 5% figure is actually achieved, that means that we've found almost 99% of the pothole repairs which have been done adequately, which doesn't reflect the experience of anyone, certainly in the northern part of the county. I don't know what the situation is in the southern part of the county. And I think Councillor Beckett was entirely correct when he said this is down to management. And I'm just wondering, and particularly management of our contractor, and I am worried that we are not, it's not merely a matter of the timing of when work is done, but also the quality of work which is done, and that we are failing to manage that process effectively if we only identified 10 potholes in 4 months, and winter months at that, December and January, 10 potholes in 4 months where the work wasn't done adequately.
So I can see that Alex has got his hand up, so I'll come to you first, Alex.
Yes,
But
I
then-
don't think you've quite got the details of that right there. I'd be really interested to go back and check that one of exactly the numbers you're saying. I don't recognize that 10 figure right now. What is important to say, though, is that historically, under previous administrations, there was no formalized checking process of potholes. None were inspected. There was no minimum quantity that needed to be done. And I find that absolutely astonishing that that was not the case historically. The new Aurora system has allowed us to set a 5% minimum to be inspected. So that is now every single one of our pothole repairs, a minimum of 5% of those will be inspected. That is nowhere near as much as I would like it to be, but it does give us a baseline figure for how many, to give us, it's designed to give us a rough indicator of how many are failing rather than exact absolute numbers. There are also further work on top of that, which unfortunately was not, I don't think, identified within that Freedom of Information Act that you talk about there. Obviously, we also have NEC project managers that will be inspecting things separately. And also, if any HMO identifies a defect outside of that 5% process, they can also raise that as a failure and defect on that. So I think you are right to say that more work needs to be done. You, Chris, I'm sure are very aware of the contract that was, again, historically signed, which has no real penalties in it for quality. And that is something that I know is there's been a confidential session, so I can't say very much on that one, but it is something that is concerning and something that needs to be addressed in any future contract, very much so, because fundamentally what we need to be looking at is sampling, looking at the then percentage that we expect to be failing, and then getting redress on that over the whole sum. We can't be expecting our officers to be inspecting 60,000 potholes a year. That simply doesn't make sense and doesn't scale with the number of them. So systems do need to be put in place. It is something that is top of my mind, but that sampling is a very new process that historically was not done by this council, and is something that we insisted on because we wanted to actually get a real baseline for what repair quality was. I think, again, though, we will say that repair quality has dropped when we look at the months that have been going on at the moment, and that is something we need to be looking at very closely. And I won't take words out of Lee's mouth, but I think Lee can probably talk to some of the work that we've been doing with the contractor on that one.
Thank you, Lee.
Chair, I'm conscious this isn't Highways and Transport Committee, and there was quite a long discussion on this matter. I wanted to just pick up two things that were raised. So firstly, the reason why the indicators relate in large part to Q2 are because many of them are annual or based on national surveys. The main operational indicator, which is basically the repair timescales, in view of the situation which Councillor Beckett outlined, we have issued a note to all members updating all members of the performance issues related to the repair situation, which is related to the weather. It's related to long-term backlogging maintenance, which is common throughout England, and it is related to underperformance by the contractor. All those three things are being addressed. The contractor has ramped up their crews, and the council has put better resources or deployed more resources to cope with the backlogging correspondence, which we're now getting on top of, and indeed in working more closely with the contractor, the street works team, enabling the contractor to get on site. So it's one thing to have additional crews, you need to deploy them, and that's what's been happening there. But members have got an update on the position we are at the moment, and to clarify, the indicator will almost certainly be very bright red, I'm afraid to say, for Q2. We will want to get it back on track for Q1 in the new financial year, and we're working hard with the contractor to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Elisa, did you have your hand up?
Very quickly, and I wasn't going to talk too much about highways, but obviously other people did. I'm going to try and keep it very much not highways committee style discussion, but more corporate performance discussion, because this is where we are now. If we're expecting an indicator that's going to glow redder than it has before, I do think obviously, some of the things that we need to do, other than the obvious that's been said until now, is to make sure that we are not shooting ourselves in the foot for some of these things, and that some of the stuff that is in our control, that we actually try and improve, difficult as that may be. Lee mentioned Streetworks. This is not at all about a specific case, but let's put it this way. I'm aware of instances where we don't talk to each other. The right hand does not talk to the left hand. And as a result, works that are budgeted for, paid for, have been in the capital program for a long time, get cancelled at the very last minute because Streetworks is doing something else. Now, this will leave you with a very large amount of very, very bad defects that have been marked for a very long time that you won't do until 27, 28 now, which is what we've been told, because these kinds of works only really have a 3-month window in the year where they can be done. Streetworks is not lightning coming from God. Streetworks is us. We need to talk to each other better, because otherwise, the more of these things are left to fester. Summer is good for potholes. Newer potholes don't appear as much, one hopes, because even if it isn't likely to be that much both wet and cold. But if the situation is deteriorating when the conditions are good, then I don't want to be the person measuring the outcomes next February, to be completely honest. So I would suggest that we do look more in details about these kinds of things, because that is within our control to make sure that we coordinate our works a bit better. And I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you. I think the point about coordination is well made. Lee, I don't know if there's anything else you particularly want to pick up on that.
Yes, Streetworks is an area which will be having my attention in a bit more detail in the next few weeks. Not everything with Streetworks is in our control. So if, for instance, if a utility wants to get onto the network and it's an emergency, they can do so. But they need to justify it's an emergency. So it isn't all in our control, but planned works, yes, it should be in our control to manage that in a more effective way.
Thank you. I think Mark was next, Chris.
Thank you, Lucy. It's my old favourite hobby horse, I'm afraid, the CYP 005. We're not reporting the right figures. We at CYP were told by CYP officers that the goal was 48%. Anybody on CYP nodded to accept that that was the case. And yet this report is telling us it's 20%, and lo and behold, it's green because we've done well to get to 23.6%. Also note with interest that the previous performance is reported as 0, yet the graph shows below that it plainly was better than 0, albeit well below what we wanted to be. So I'm just looking for some commonality and some uniformity here, please, that we make sure that we're presenting what's being said and that we're joining up both committees.
Martin.
So the 20% target is the target for 2026. The 46% is for the subsequent year. It's not 48, it's 46%. Obviously, they are targets. The aspiration is to be higher than that for this year and higher than that for next year. But that's why it says 20% there. The 0% previous performance, yeah, I'll take that away and have a look at that one. But the numbers in there, the 20% and the 23.6 are accurate numbers. So.
Joe also wants to come in. Sorry, Joe.
Yeah, it's just to say that in relation to the 0%, that's what was reported at the end of the last quarter, so the quarter before Q3, which is September. So if you track down to the graph for 005, you'll see that corresponds to the figure that's reported in the dashboard. So it's just, this is I suppose, a look in the rearview mirror. So it's things that have passed. So that's possibly why there's some misalignment.
And it does reflect the EHCP targets in the third paragraph of that narrative.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Lucy. I just thought I'd give some assistance to Councillor Beckett, who I think didn't recognise that figure of 10 pothole repairs being requested for or required to be redone by the council. It is unfortunate that we don't have easy access to freedom of information requests, but it is, the reference is FOI 2026 0100 7608, and it was given on the 9th of February 2026. And it stated that the council undertakes random audits and inspects pothole repairs, as well as other work undertaken by the contractor to ensure required contractual and quality standards are being met. And since October 2025, 10 of these defect inspections resulted in the contractor not having been assessed to meet the required standards, with repairs being reworked fully at their expense. So that's where I got the 10 figure from. It was from a freedom of information request covering that 4-month period.
I think that's 10 inspections rather than 10 potholes. That might
There,
not be
there
the
were
same
10,
thing.
10 of the defect inspections resulted in the contractor not having been assessed to meet the required standards, with repairs being reworked fully at their expense.
I think an inspection may not be the same as a single pothole, but anyway, we will investigate. But thank you for clarifying. Any further comments on this? I don't see any more. So thank you very much. We have scrutinised and commented on the performance information presented. Thank you, Joe, for the presentation and for the reports. And we finally get to item 9, which is the agenda plan and the training plan, appointments to outside bodies. I don't think we have any appointments to outside bodies. Does anybody wish to comment on the agenda or the training plan? I don't see any comments. So thank you very much. Oh, Elisa.
Sorry, I like asking this because I like to know the answer, if it's known. Am I to understand from the empty table at the beginning that we're not going to make use of the reserve meeting on the 12th of May?
I don't anticipate us needing to use it. I can't. I will check, but I would imagine that we probably don't need to make use of that meeting. But something may happen between now and then. I mean, all sorts of things might happen between now and the 12th of May that might change that. I'll check. But thank you.
Going to be pretty knackered, so I will like not having to do a meeting, but it would
I
be
think there are a
useful
number of
to
us
know.
here who might quite like not to. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for your attendance, and the meeting is now closed. Thank you.